Here is the technical model for performing the back squat. The technical model will be broken down into unracking, the start position, the descent, bottom position, the ascent, and re-racking. Unracking the bar. When setting up for the back squat, the bar should be placed in the squat rack at approximately armpit height, as shown. You should position yourself with the squat rack in front of you and the platform behind you to ensure you're always unracking and returning the bar safely at the end of the set. Your grip on the bar should be an overhand claw grip with your thumb wrapped around the bar. This allows you to pull down on the bar, creating torque. If you had a suicide grip, for example, with your thumbs not wrapped around the bar, you'd be less able to do so. To unrack, step under the bar and position the bar so that it rests on your upper trapezius and posterior deltoids. This is the high bar position for the back squat. This position typically places the center of mass above the base of support. The squat may also be performed using a low bar back position, as to be discussed later. This involves resting the bar on the mid-trapezius and rear deltoids, which lowers the center of mass and reduces the lever arm, requiring a technique with more of a forward torso lean in order to keep the bar above the base of support. So with the overhand claw grip and the bar resting on your upper trapezius, your elbows should be bent at approximately 90 degrees. In this position, the athlete is often instructed to pull their elbows back. This shoulder abduction recruits the trapezius, therefore creating a shelf for the bar to sit on, avoiding resting the bar on the spinous processes of the back. Keeping the bar in a neutral position, demonstrating a natural lordotic curve, you should breathe in and extend at your ankles, knees and hips into a standing position with the bar on the back as shown in the video. Then take 2 or 3 small steps back away from the rack. Once unracking the bar and taking 2 or 3 small steps back, you'll now be in the start position for performing the back squat. In this start position, your head should be in neutral, looking forward, in order to maintain a neutral spine throughout the movement. Your shoulder blades should be pulled back. This scapular retraction recruits the rhomboids, trapezius and latissimus dorsi, which helps to reduce the flexion on the spine throughout the descent. In the start position, your chest should be up and out, again with the goal of maintaining a neutral spine. Your foot position should be slightly wider than shoulder width, allowing you to sit in between your legs, preventing the need to sit posteriorly too much in the descent pattern. Positioning the feet pointing slightly outwards at around 5 to 1 on a clock face involves external rotation at the hip. Taking this stance helps to increase the flexion available at the hip joint, and it also encourages supination at the foot, which improves the force transfer throughout the feet. Weight should be evenly distributed at the start between the left and right foot in order to encourage even weight distribution and symmetry throughout the entire movement. The lowering phase or eccentric phase of the squat is then termed the descent. Before descending, you should take a deep breath in and hold your breath. Doing this helps to create intra-abdominal pressure, which helps to reduce the compressive forces on the lumbar spine. In addition, you should also tighten your lower back and brace abdominal musculature. The tightening of the lower back and bracing helps to prevent any flexion of the spine during the descent. You should also pull down on the bar as though bending the bar across your back. This abduction at the shoulder helps to again recruit the latissimus dorsi, which prevents any flexion of the spine. You should also aim to screw your feet outwards so your knees track along the line of the big toe. Again, this encourages external rotation at the hip as discussed earlier. During the descent, it's important to keep the knees tracking out along the line of the big toe. This helps to reduce the internal load placed on the passive knee structures during the phase. Once taking a deep breath in and holding your breath, the descent is initiated by flexion at the ankles, knees and hips simultaneously, and you descend until your thighs break parallel to the ground. The tempo of this should be relatively slow and controlled. However, this tempo is likely to be dictated by the load being lifted. Throughout the descent, you should aim to keep your heels on the floor and your weight shifts towards the rear part of your foot. You should maintain a neutral spine with a natural lordotic curve and maintain upper body posture with the elbows pulled back and the chest up and out as before. We can see the bottom position within the video. During the bottom position, you should have your head up looking forward, your chest up and out with the elbows pulled back, and you should be in a position with your thighs parallel to the ground. Weight should be distributed towards the rear foot, which helps to reduce the anterior shear forces experienced at the knee. As during the descent, during the bottom position, we should see the knees pointing out along the line of the big toe. The back should remain neutral throughout. As you can see in the video, once the bottom position is hit, we then move on to the ascent or concentric phase of the back squat. The ascent phase is initiated with powerful triple extension at the ankle, knee and hip joints in a simultaneous fashion. The athlete often is instructed to lead with their chest, which helps to maintain an upright torso position and reduce flexion of the spine. As with before during the descent and bottom position, it's important to ensure the knees remain aligned with the big toe during the drive upwards. There should also be a neutral curvature of the spine and the head should be looking forward. During the ascent, the weight shifts from rear foot to forefoot. Once the erect stance is achieved, you then breathe out. It is important to breathe out only at the top of the position in order to maintain the intra-abdominal pressure that was created. Once the set or desired number of repetitions has been complete and you are in a fully erect stance, you'll then look to re-rack the bar. In order to re-rack the bar safely and technically correct, you should step forward towards the rack until the bar is positioned above the supports or until ideally it makes contact with the uprights, as you can see in the video. You'll then simultaneously flex at the ankles, knees and hips, making sure to keep the back straight. You'll descend until the bar is securely replaced in the rack. This is then the end of your back squat.
So far, you have seen the technical model of the high bar back squat. As with a lot of exercises, there are multiple technical model variations that can be taken into consideration when performing a back squat. In this section, we will now discuss some variations regarding the back squat. So far, you have seen the technical model of the high bar back squat. As with a lot of exercises, there are multiple technical model variations that can be taken into consideration when performing a back squat. In this section, we will now discuss some variations regarding the back squat. The first variation we will look at is the position of the bar on the back. In the technical model that you have just seen, this uses the high bar position. Where the high bar back squat places the bar on your posterior rear deltoids at the bottom of the neck, you can also perform a low bar back squat. In the following footage, the athlete is performing a low bar back squat. The The low bar back squat positions the bar between your posterior rear deltoids and rear shoulders, at the top of your shoulder blades. In this position, you're required to squeeze your shoulder blades together to create muscle support for the bar so that the bar can't dig into your spine. In this slowed down footage of the low bar back squat, you can see that you'll lean further forward to keep the bar balanced over your midfoot, your hips will be moved further back, and your knees will come less forward. In general, the high bar is easier on the shoulders, wrists, and elbows. However, the low bar position increases your squat lift by 10 to 20% as you are using the hips more. This is one of the reasons why powerlifters squat with a low bar. Most people squat high bar because it's more natural. If your shoulders don't like the low bar position, stick with high bar, but if you want to squat as heavy as you can, try the low bar. The next variation we will look at is depth of squat. In the technical model of the back squat you've just seen, we have squatted to a depth of just below parallel relative to the ground. There are many variations of depth of squat, but the one we will look at here is a bottom to floor squat. In this footage, the athlete is performing a bottom to floor squat. A bottom to floor squat is where you squat all the way down until your bottom touches your ankles. This works your muscles through a longer range of motion. Olympic weightlifters will do this and sometimes pause at the bottom, as this mimics the catch during heavy squat cleans. Powerlifters don't do this because the lower you go below parallel, the less weight you squat. Most people don't have the hip flexibility and structure to squat bottom to floor with proper form. The lower back will most likely round at the bottom, which is called butt wank. Rounding your spine when it's loaded squeezes your lower back discs and can herniate them. Your knees can also take a beating with bottom to the floor squats, especially if you drop down fast and rebound off your knee joints instead of your muscles. We're now going to look at differing depths of squat. Firstly, we'll look at the quarter squat. The quarter squat requires a knee bend to a 45-degree angle. This places greater emphasis on the quadriceps, and it also enables you to lift more weight. The half squat requires a knee bend to an angle of just before your hips are parallel to the ground. During the ascent of a half squat, you are not fully activating the hamstrings and the glutes. The quads are activated more, and more force is placed on the knees. The full squat is when you push your hips back and down to a level where the front side of your hips is just below the kneecap or below parallel. Some people like to go bottom to floor. Full squats provide a full contraction of the hamstrings, glutes and quadriceps with less force on the knees. A study in 2016 by Rhea et al. Indicated that quarter squats may transfer better to sprinting than half and full squats. The next variation we will look at is applying the use of a weightlifting belt. Weightlifting belts are worn by some and not by others. Research on weightlifting belts can also be quite conflicting in its findings. The most commonly agreed upon benefit to wearing a weight belt is that they increase intra-abdominal pressure. Intra-abdominal pressure is the pressure within your abdomen. When you increase intra-abdominal pressure, the pressure inside the abdominal cavity pushes on the spine to support it internally, while your core muscles and lower back push on the spine from the outside. It basically stabilizes the spine and reduces the stress it receives under loads. Of course, you can always create your own intra-abdominal pressure by performing the Valsalva maneuver on your own. The weight belt just gives your stomach something to push against, increasing the pressure, thereby stabilizing your core and relieving the stress on your spine. The negatives for using a belt are that it affects the experience of learning how to engage your core, particularly in the case of beginners. The belt can also mask or aggravate potential injuries. It can also lead to weaknesses of the lower back as belts take the stress off of this area. Dr. Stuart McGill states that to obtain the maximal effect from a belt, the lifter must lift poorly and in a way that exposed the back to a much higher risk of injury. The final footage we will look at is the variation of stance width in the back squat. With any exercise, you can get comfortable and complacent over time. Some coaches believe if you work on back squats through various stances and foot placements, you can bring up weak points. The benefits in varying your stance are thought to be useful for considering the numerous positions athletes move through in their sport. Stance width variation can also allow for muscular imbalance, which can help keep injuries down as well. In this footage, the athlete is performing a back squat using a wide stance. When using a wide stance, you want to drive the knees out and you want to avoid too much forward lean. A wider stance leads to more hip and hamstring recruitment. In this footage, the athlete is now performing a back squat using a closed stance. Closed stance squats put more emphasis on the quads. In a wide stance squat, the weight is further back on the foot and there is more hamstring stretch on the descent, whereas in the closed stance, the weight is on the midfoot and the knees go slightly further forward, causing emphasis on the quads.
Now that we have looked at the technical model of the back squat and variations from that model, it is important to look at some of the errors that may occur when performing the lift. It may also be possible to prescribe certain exercises or mobility in order to correct these errors. However, if you are ever unsure as to why these errors are occurring, it is best to refer your athletes to a physio or someone who might know a bit more about these issues. Firstly, let's watch our participant complete the back squat. As you can see, during the descent and ascent phases of the squat, the participant's knees seem to collapse inwards. This is also known as knee valgus. Essentially, gravity acting on the body induces large adduction and internal rotation torques on the hips while the hips move into flexion. The hips must absorb and reverse the sagittal plane flexion torque while stabilizing the femur in the frontal and transverse planes, so the knees track over the toes. Women are generally more prone to experiencing knee valgus due to their proportionately wider hips. However, there are many causes of knee valgus, including weak hips, tight ankles, and impaired quad and hamstring function. One way to begin to fix this problem is by using a resistance band placed around the knees. The coach should cue the participant to keep the resistance band tight, forcing the knees outwards, tracking over the toes throughout the movement. This will help the participant to focus on driving the knees out instead of letting them collapse inwards. This will also help to increase the strength of the glute medius, which, as previously mentioned, weakness in this area can be a cause of knee valgus. Okay, moving on to the next issue, let's again watch our participant complete the back squat. As you can see, during the descent phase of the squat, the heels of the participant begin to lift off the floor. This means that the weight is distributed more towards the forefoot instead of it being correctly distributed towards the heel and rear part of the foot. One of the main causes for this is poor ankle mobility. A way to test this is by using the knee to wall test, which is being demonstrated in the video now. Starting with the toes next to the wall, flex at the ankle and push the knee to the wall. If the knee reaches the wall without the heel lifting off the floor, then you can progress to moving your foot further back an inch at a time away from the wall. If the heel does lift off the floor when the toes are relatively close to the wall, maybe 3 or 4 inches away, then you can deem your ankle mobility to be poor. This is also useful to compare between the ankles to see if one is more mobile than the other. So for example, if one ankle gets 3 inches away from the wall, but the other one gets maybe 6 or 7, then you can tell that that one ankle is contributing quite heavily to that heel lift, and that ankle has really got quite a poor ankle mobility. A way to correct this is by placing something under the heel so that it's already raised off the ground. This can be done by either wearing weightlifting shoes, which have a wedge heel, or by placing a small plate under the heel in order to raise it, as shown in the video. This will enable the ankle to go through a greater range of motion. Moving on to the final fault, let's again look at our participant completing the back squat. As you can see, during the squat, the participant leans forward at the hips instead of keeping the chest raised. A forward lean will shift the center of gravity anteriorly and increase activation of the quadriceps while decreasing activation of the glutes. In addition, once in the bottom position and the hip flexors have turned on, the body is going to want to use the quads to extend the knees. However, 2 of the 3 main hip flexors are attached to the quadriceps, which are now firing. As a result, when you stand up, the hip flexors are going to stay shortened, which will contribute to an anterior pelvic tilt and make it really difficult to adequately activate the posterior hip muscles. The primary movers in hip flexion are the rectus femoris and sartorius, along with the iliopsoas. There are a few smaller muscles that also play a role, but typically, when you have tight or inflamed hip flexors, it is due to a dysfunction of one or more of these aforementioned muscles. One way to fix this is by increasing the mobility of the hip flexors. An example of this is quadruped rocking. If you get your athlete on all fours and simply start shifting their weight backwards, then it is pretty likely that you're going to engage your flexors to do so. However, by focusing on pushing with your shoulders, you're using different muscles to produce the movement, and that will allow you to achieve the position without activating your flexors. This will also teach your body that your hip flexors don't need to be firing as hard as possible in order to achieve this position at the hip.